want to welcome those who will be watching this video via YouTube whenever you watch it. This is for the Morehead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study, studying through the book of Judges. And really, we don't have that much farther to go. We are going to be in chapter 19. So there's chapter 19, 20, and 21. We are in what is known as the appendix of the book. And the appendix is really supplementary material that is added at the end of a writing. And so while we've gone through all of the 13 judges, Samson being the last, the author talked about all of the events in relation to them, and now the author wants to give us this extra material. And the author's not concerned about where it fits in terms of the chronology of the judges, but simply to know some things, additional things about really the spiritual well-being of the nation and the moral well-being of the nation, which both are not good. But the events in chapter 19 are going to be shocking and awful for us to read concerning God's chosen people, the Israelites. Remember, the Israelites were given that special law. God gave it to them so they could have holy lives before God, that they were going to be set apart from all the peoples on the earth, that they were going to be God's chosen people by covenant. However, the reality is that after Joshua died, the elders who survived Joshua died, and all of that generation died. What we've seen earlier in the book of Judges is it says there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. And that's in chapter 2. Isn't that sad? And this is really the state of this nation. The Bible writer's goal is merely to recount for us the cold, hard facts about a nation which has lost its way on the path of righteousness before God, and he lets their terrible deeds that he speaks of speak for themselves without condemnation. In other words, I'm going to tell you these sad realities about what was going on at this time period, and nothing really has to be added to because it speaks for itself in terms of the evil. We also recognize that Israel as a nation, we're told that there was no king. We're told that a few times, and that every man did what was right in his own eyes. In other words, they really didn't know the word of God. They had all of these Canaanites they left behind in the nation. They were unduly affected by them because they didn't destroy them, and essentially they have some of what God told them to do, and then they're sort of doing everything according to the way that they want to do things. The events of Judges chapter 19 are very similar to the events of Genesis 19, when the two angels, after talking to Abraham, came to Sodom and stayed in the home of Lot and his family. As I've talked about, the appendix of the book, chapter 17 through 21, we've seen in chapters 17 18 really the perversion of the religion of Israel with the adoption of Canaanite idolatrous practices being added to the worship. And now in these last few chapters, chapters 19 through 21, the author of Judges shows us the widespread immorality of this period in Israel's history. Remember, this time period of the Judges is considered really the Dark Ages. So we're between great leaders like Moses and Joshua, and then we go through this really bad period, and then we're going to get into the kings. We get this King Saul and David and Solomon, and we go to a very good period.
Brother Mike,
yes.
How many years went by like that?
For the period of the Judges?
Yeah.
I saw something, I was looking at like a timeline. I think it was a couple hundred years, like 1100 to 1300, or 1300 to 1100 BC, if I'm not mistaken. So we're talking about 200-ish years. So but that's probably a good one for me to look at. But it is an extended period of time, so. And if you start looking at all the times, through the Judges where they were under this one's oppression for 20 years, 40 years, whatever, I'm sure that's a way that a lot of those numbers can be figured too. So it's a good question. We're going to read the first 9 verses of the book. And Sister Marvin, would you like to read or pass? Do you want to read a few of the verses?
Judges chapter 19.
Yeah. If you don't want to read, that's fine, but I'm going to ask you if you want an opportunity to read. And I would just have you read verses 1 through 4 if you're open to it. Okay, and then I'm going to assign 5 through 9 to Jenna. Okay.
And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levi sojourned on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah, and his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there for 4 months. And her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again, having his servant with him, and a couple of asses, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodged there.
Now it came about on the 4th day that they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. And the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you may go." So both of them sat down and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Please be willing to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." Then the man arose to go, but his father-in-law urged him, so that he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose to go early in the morning, and the girl's father said, "Please sustain yourself and wait until afternoon." So both of them ate. When the man arose to go along with his concubine and servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, the day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. Then tomorrow you may arise early for your journey, so that you may go home."
All right, very good. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the specifics that are said here in these verses we read. And it says, again, the Bible writer reminds us in the verse 1, "Now it came about in those days when there was no king." Remember that I said that a lot of commentary, those who give commentary say that this is Samuel writing a period that he lived under to some, for an extent of years. He's writing about past events, really to show those who are going to be under a king, or who are under a king, really sort of the difference in terms of where the nation was going. We got to remember that this is sort of a loose confederation of these territories. In other words, there's not a lot of unity in terms of the problems going on. And once they get a king, we've got central leadership again, much like Moses, much like Joshua. Now we've got central leadership, and the idea is everybody is sort of collectively brought together. And so this is just sort of noting really that difference. It's also interesting to note that this Levite took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah, and this is the same place where the first Levite in chapter 17 verse 8 was from, when he came before he came to the hill country of Ephraim. So next we want to kind of look at this word concubine. I think there's lots of different ideas about concubines. Remember hearing Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, something like that. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. But people have different ideas about what a concubine was. And so I'm going to read some stuff here from Baker's Evangelical Dictionary of Biblical Theology, really explaining what a concubine is. And so it says, a concubine is a female slave who functioned as a secondary wife and surrogate mother. So I'm going to stop there and get you to think about Abraham and his wife. And the second wife he took was Hagar. Hagar was a concubine. Remember, she was a handmaiden to Sarah, so she was really a concubine. And so a concubine is not just sort of some woman on the side or some women that the men are not married to. They are married to the concubines. They're just considered a secondary wife, and I'll explain more. It says concubines are mentioned primarily in early Israelite history during the patriarchal times, the period of the judges, and the early monarchy, although some later kings also had concubines. While concubines did not have the same status as wives, they were not to be mistreated. This is from Exodus 21, verses 7 through 10. It says, nor could they be violated by other males. Genesis 35, verse 22. It also says, and I'm not reading the entirety of it, so if you have any questions when I get done, you can add them. I just want to get sort of the gist of it. It says, the sons of some concubines were treated as co-heirs with the sons of wives. The practice of taking concubines as wife was used to provide a male heir for a barren wife, Genesis 16, 35 and 36. In addition, the practice provided a societal safety net for poor families who could sell their daughters in dire times, Exodus 21, 7 through 10. So the idea is that the family was really poor. It was allowed under the law of Moses to sort of sell your daughter to be able to be a concubine. And so there was rules about it. In other words, the man that bought her, that would be his wife or be son's wife. She was be treated and respected. It was allowed under the law of Moses. And finally, I want to say multiplying children through concubines. Oh, I'm sorry.
They were sold because they were poor. Is that the way of maintaining the whole family or just a woman?
Well, it was a way for the family to generate money. In other words, if you were that poor,
Oh, they give her,
they
sold
would
her for
sell her, and the idea wasn't not in the way that she's going to be put into an environment where she's going to be mistreated. There were rules that, like I said, either the person buying her had to take her as a wife or the son. Essentially she was to be well treated, all these different things. But the families were allowed, if they needed money, to be able to sell their daughters. And I know it's really foreign for us to hear that in our day and age, but it's markedly different than a lot of times in a different environment where women are sold and then they're really abused and mistreated. Not the case under the law of Moses. So it's a different time. It is difficult for us to relate to some of those things like that, but equally said, people from that time period, if they could see the way we do things, they might be surprised at us. So, but yeah. Finally, I wanted to say about this, multiplying children through concubines would not normally complicate the inheritance lines, but would increase the available family workforce and the family wealth. So there, I don't want to get into every instance of concubines, but sort of we understand the idea that sometimes people get the impression that it's sort of a lover on the side. You're not really married to him. You have your wife, and then you have stuff going on the side. Is really not the case at all. And so, again, the idea that the woman is a slave and she's taken as a wife, and we see this happening throughout the Old Testament, situations like that. And even with Jacob, he married Rachel and Leah, and then they had this competition for generating children. What happened? Well, next thing you know, Rachel says, well, here's my handmaiden, because she would get credit for the children that Jacob fathered. so that would count to her credit. So, well, here, take my handmaid. What's Leah do after she's not able to have children? Here, take my handmaid. This is what we're talking about. These would be concubines. He wouldn't just be having sexual relations with them, but he would have taken them as wives. So he goes from 2 wives, and now he's got 4 wives. So, yeah. Any thoughts about that? Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little different, and we're not pitching
But
it
you would
either.
think,
Yeah,
like the kings.
yeah.
It's pretty much a choice they made because they had 300 wives. So this king married 300, but yet, or 500, and then he had
I mean,
300
even David,
concubines.
even
So
David
that
had
means he
12 wives or something like that.
he picked and choose.
Yeah, I think the thing about it, sometimes we think it's maybe the sexual aspect, and that's true to a degree. But when we have kings in Israel, even in kings in these other societies, the pagan societies, if you're a king here, and you got, remember that sort of each area has a king, and there's a place over here next door, and they have an area, they've got a king, an army, and all that. What's something good that can help bring stability between you? Hey, I'll marry your daughter, and maybe you can marry one of my daughters. And essentially, we have ambassadors, you know. We sort of, so it was done sort of for political aspect. In other words, I've got somebody now with you who can essentially be an ambassador for me. And so that was considered a
Were they allowed
wise.
to leave the man? Like this lady left him and went back home.
Yeah.
Was that allowed?
Well, no, she shouldn't have. She shouldn't have left. I mean, she had a reason she left, but she shouldn't. That would have been inappropriate, unless, of course, the husband would have said, "Yeah, hey, I'm going to go
that
visit."
Era now,
Yeah.
but in that era, I mean, I
Yeah.
never heard of it that.
Right. So that would have not been probably the norm, since women were under either their fathers until they got married, and they were under their husbands. There was accountability. Brother Timothy, do you have something?
My Bible says, is it concubine? A concubine was a female servant or slave
Yep.
regarded as part of the family.
Yep.
Her usual function was childbearing to
Yep.
enlarge the family. Those days, like, you don't have white collar job in those days. The main occupation is farming. Like there's outbreak of war, raising of army, and also animal, the rare animal. So the purpose of the concubine is just to enlarge the family, because of the strength of the family in those days lies on the number of the family, how large the family is. How large the family is. Really the strength of the family.
enlarge the family.
So, yeah.
And it seemed like, like with an Abraham said, there's the I always forget about that law. There was a name, but it was a common law of the time period. There wasn't, it was written. It was before the written law of Moses, and I always forget about it. But under that law, it was perfectly normal, as abnormal as we look at today, that if your wife was childless, that essentially you have a female slave, she could essentially agree to you taking her as a wife, and then, you know what, now you're not childless anymore, and she would essentially really be fulfilling her duty as a wife, and motherhood was important. Remember, they wanted children, especially male children. That sort of protected them in their old age, and essentially, really the line of the family line. So, I mean, as strange as it is to us.
Surrogate mom.
Yeah. So as strange it is to us, it's just because we're not in the time period. If we're in that time period, it's not strange. But we're not in that time period. So when we look back, we're like, that's really different. But if we were with them, we wouldn't think anything else, because that's what everybody did. And the same thing is true with cultures. There's things in Timothy's culture that they don't do here. And we they don't do over there. There's unique things, and so when we go to a whole different culture, we think that sometimes odd, and we think that's really different. But it's only different because we weren't raised in that culture. I'm sure Brother Timothy coming here, some culture shock. You know, it's like, hey, this is a lot different than back home. And it's only because you're not used to it. Not necessarily that there's something wrong with it, but yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk about what happened here. So the Bible writer is sort of laying out the story for us, talks about this Levite, talks about him taking a concubine. Then verse 2, and this is all leading to an enlargement really of the story. So we need really to lay down the groundwork here. And it says in verse 2, but his concubine played the harlot against him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for a period of 4 months. Why do you think she left the Levite after it was discovered that she was involved with harlotry? Right?
Because under this time they could be stoned for that, right?
Okay, well that would be considered adultery,
Oh.
right?
Well,
That's what that word means.
What's that?
That's what that word means.
Harlot would be sort of a prostitute.
Oh, okay.
So we're
Okay.
talking about, illicit sex, and she's married to the Levite, and she's getting money. It doesn't tell us why she does this. A harlot really means that, a woman's getting paid for sex. So this is apparently what she does, and it obviously, there's an awareness that the husband's not going to be one bit happy. Whether or not, under the law of Moses, if you committed adultery, that's a capital offense. Imagine if we had those kind of punishments today, how much people would be true to their spouses, and they would make different choices. This is the whole point, is this is a covenant. You don't do these sorts of things. Things are a lot
They
different.
were all doing what they wanted.
They were doing what they want. And it's doubtful in my mind, seeing that this is trying to tell us a larger story, that he would have said, listen, under the law of Moses, I have the ability to have you stoned to death. But he still could have killed her. In other words, there's the reason why she fled, is because she's been unfaithful. Okay, and so this is what happened. Doesn't tell us why she did that. Just says that she does it. What she does, she runs away to her father's house, and she's there for 4 months. I'm sure she's sort of, trying to really find a place of shelter there. And again, if we're really looking at the morality of the country, okay, so she ran away from the husband. What should have the father done if she knew her daughter was involved with harlotry? Okay, maybe she didn't mention it to him. Just said, hey, I know I'm here, I'm unexpected, but, my husband said it was okay, and so here I am. We don't know. But there she is at her father's house, and let's see here. Okay, so the Bible writer tells us all this, and sort of tells us that she makes this choice. Verse 3 says, then her husband arose and went after her to speak tenderly to her in order to bring her back, taking with him his servants and a pair of donkeys. So he brought him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he was glad to meet him. And so the impression that I'm sort of left with is she got away as quickly as she could because that maybe sort of a fit of anger or whatever, she very well could have died as a result of that. But now that she's been away, he's sort of looking at this differently. He seems to miss her and wants her back. And so what he does is he goes to find her, assumes that that's where she's at, because we're not told how he knows she's there. But this word tenderly in the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English lexicon talks about the idea of talking to her sort of in relation to joy and gladness, speaking unto her kindly. In other words, he's trying to sort of woo her, try to bring her back with him. And so the father-in-law sees him, is happy to see him, and really invites him to stay in his house. Verse 4 says, his father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. And, right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's an interesting word to use, detained. Like, that makes it
Put
sound
your
like-
hands behind your back
No,
and
it
slap the
sounds
cuffs
like-
on there.
You know when the police say you're not free to go, that's kind of what.
Yeah, yeah, so this word is, New American Standard, I don't have any other translation before me, but, it's sort of,
It's everything.
is a detained? Yeah,
Everything.
yeah, detained.
Mine said, okay, and he remained with him there 3 days, so, okay.
You
Mine
said what?
remain.
Remain.
Oh, remain.
Yeah.
That seems probably more, because we're so used to words being very specific about things, but the word detained actually means to hold them back, slow them down, or stop them from moving on.
Okay. You see, and his father-in-law, the guest father, made him stay.
Yeah,
And
Made him stay.
he made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days.
yeah. And we ask ourselves, why does the father-in-law want him to stay?
He's
Probably,
scared he's gonna hurt his daughter. He's trying to.
if he knows that she's been unfaithful, or maybe he's thinking, you know what, maybe I can get you to stay
Yeah.
here, and you don't have to leave with my daughter. I mean, he obviously has his motivation. We're not told exactly in his mind, the father-in-law's mind, what he wants, but as we read this, we can see that he's trying real hard to not let this guy move on, okay? So it says about the Levite, he remained with him 3 days. And I thought it was interesting as I was studying this, kind of looking at the customs of the day and stuff. And so I have a book by Ralph Gower entitled The New Manners and Customs of Bible Times. And it said, quote, departure was delayed. We're talking about in relation to hospitality. Departure was delayed as long as possible, for once a person had accepted such hospitality, it was looked upon as insulting to leave it early, as if it was not, if it were not good enough. And so this seems to be, the idea is I can't just sort of grab my woman and leave. I mean, I have to actually stay here, and I'm willing to do it. He seems to be willing to do it for 3 days, and then after that, he doesn't seem so agreeable to do that. Any thoughts or questions about any of that?
Makes me kind of just think of like, the father-in-law, maybe he was just bored and he's like, hey, somebody's here, I can meet him.
All right, verse 5. Now on the 4th day, when they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go, and the girl's father said to his son-in-law, sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you can go. Wait, that sounds okay, right? So we sort of see this delay tactic. I mean, it sounds good. It's like, okay, what could that hurt, right? Verse 6, so both of them sat down and ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, please be willing to spend the night, and your heart be merry. Okay. Verse 7, then the man arose to go, but the father urged him, and so he spent the night there again. But the man's going to sort of get wise to this. On the 8th day, verse 8 says, on the 5th day, he arose to go early, and the girl's father said, please sustain yourself and wait until afternoon. So both of them ate. And verse 9 says, when the man arose to go along with his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, behold, now the day is drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. Then tomorrow you may arise early for your journey, so that you may go home. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, they keep using the word sustain. Is that more so like, man, you better eat some food before this long journey, and then once you eat, it's like, oh, now that you're full,
Well, the idea that, he's sort of, as in hospitality, of course, that's, hospitality, the lover of strangers, the idea that you're trying to take care of your guests and whatever needs there. In other words, it's my job as a host to take care of you and make sure, that you're being fed and taken care of. And as long as you're here, I can do that. So let me keep doing that. And then once I do that, then you can go whenever that is, And so he seems to be trying really hard not to let his son-in-law go. Doesn't want him to go. I mean, it's the idea is we pulling out all the stops to keep him from going. The Jewish day was from sunset to sunset. And so the Levite's father-in-law mentions that the day is coming to an end and spend the night here, which indicates it must be the fourth watch, which was from 3 p.m. to sunset, 6 p.m. It is daylight here, but by the time they get to Gibeah in verse 14, the sun will set on them. So, any questions before we move on to the next few verses? We're going to read 10 through 15. So, Ryan, do you want to read that for us, please?
Sure. But the man was not willing to spend the night, so he arose and departed and came to a place opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem, and there were with him a pair of saddled donkeys. His concubine also was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, "Please come, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites, and spend the night in it." However, his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah." He said to his servant, "Come and let us approach one of these places, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah." So they passed along and went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. When they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night.
All right. So we're looking at what's going on here. The man, the Levite, he's done. I'm going to leave, and even though it's late in the day, I know what's going to happen if I stick around. But tomorrow morning, you know what? I want to get going. I want to go home. He wants to return back to the hill country of Ephraim, and says, so they departed and came to a place opposite of Jebus, that is Jerusalem. So opposite, kind of interesting there. In the Hebrew, it's two different words. One word in Hebrew indicates space, and the other word indicates being in front of, and that's from the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English lexicon. And so the idea of being opposite. In other words, they're not in the city, but they appear to be next to it. Okay? To whatever extent that is. And so here is the story about Jerusalem. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of a history here. And in Joshua 15:63, it says, "Now as for the Jebusites," that's the occupants of Jebus, otherwise known as Jerusalem. "Now as for the Jebusites, inhabitants of Jerusalem, the sons of Judah could not drive them out. So the Jebusites lived with the sons of Judah at Jerusalem until this day." In other words, the day of the writing of the book of Joshua. Then we read in Judges 1 verse 8, it says, "Then the sons of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire." So now it's completely destroyed. Okay, so we see sort of things going on in relation to the city. And then in Judges 1:21, the Bible writer says, "But the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day." And so, well, I guess they had to rebuild the city, okay? And, the Jebusites are there again. And not only are they there, but you have the sons of Benjamin there today. And when we're talking about really what's wrong with this nation, what's supposed to be, the Jebusites are Canaanite people. So they're living in the same city as the Canaanites, the sons of Israel. What's wrong with this picture? And then we wonder why they're having spiritual dysfunction, they're having moral dysfunction. And so here's kind of what you got. And it actually, it wasn't until the time of King David. So you think about how much longer it is. Okay, the second king of Israel, it wasn't until the time of King David that the Jebusites who lived in Jebus were defeated in battle, and Jebus became the city of David, where the tabernacle would be relocated to 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 9, and eventually the temple. Solomon would build the temple there. So a conversation takes place between the Levite and his servant when they come near to the city of Jebus in verses 11 through 13. So we're going to look at this conversation. So verse 11 says, when they were near Jebus, the day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, please come and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. And so as we examine sort of their route of travel, so they were in Bethlehem, their travel is northward. Remember, he wants to get back to the hill country of Ephraim. And so they depart Bethlehem, which is in the territory of Judah, and the Levite, those with them, traveled about 5 or 6 miles and were approaching their first city, which was Jebus, where the Levite servant is suggesting that they go into the city and watch. Or they're running out of daylight. I mean, nowadays we don't think about it. Jump in the car. Hey, I gotta get somewhere really quick. Hey, I'll turn on the headlights, and there's going to be lights along the way, and we just drive. Imagine in ancient times when you don't have a flashlight, and you don't know the terrain overly well. You can't see. It's like walking around your house at night. How would you like to walk through your house at night without any lights? Or to, walk somewhere else that you're not well acquainted with no lights? I mean, it actually would be dangerous. And so you didn't travel at nighttime because you had no way to sensibly, reasonably travel. I mean, so the servant is aware of this. Is like, hey, here's Jebus. What do you think? And this is sort of what's going on. In other words, so we should go in there before it gets dark, and then we'll be set up there. And the servant refers to the Levite as his master, the idea that he has power and authority over him. The turn aside would be the idea of turning there for shelter or refuge. And then the Levite says to him, we will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah. So earlier we read it was sort of a shared city. So you had Canaanites there, you had sons of Israel. Now he says that they're foreigners. The idea of foreigner here is non-Israelite. So did all of the Canaanites leave, or is he just upset that there's Canaanites in there and he doesn't even want to go there? So we don't really know, but he says it's a city of foreigners. So maybe the majority of them are Canaanites, and that's the way he sees that city. It was under the Canaanite control, but the Levite tells the servant, we will go on to Gibeah. And so the Levite decides he would rather travel further north to the next city after Jebus, which would be Gibeah, which is roughly another 2 or 3 miles down the road, which is an Israelite city. To him, that's a lot more appealing. Kyle and Delitzsch, in their commentary, estimated the time of the 8-mile trip from Bethlehem to Gibeah at only about 2.5 or 3 hours. So think about travel in a day in ancient times on foot. This is the part that we're like, well, that seems pretty heavy duty. You're going to go somewhere, you're going to go pretty much on foot. Okay, so depending on your day, it was basically 15 miles to 20 miles in a day. And you're going to pretty much do it on foot. So anyway, I want us to sort of think about this a little bit. We think about the Israelites living in such close proximity to cities. So even with Samson, we saw where the father was from, and it was in close proximity to where he went to the Philistines. And he went there. And the idea is there's something wrong with this picture. And the picture is it really goes against what God intended. God's fear was you're going to intermarry, you're going to accept their practices, and essentially you're going to become unfaithful. And guess what? God was right. So when we read the Word of God today, and God gives us cautions about, living in the world, of ungodly people, and we're called to sort of consider how we do things and our involvement with things. That's for good reason. Why? Because we can compromise. We can get used to the way ungodly people are. We can sort of let our guard down and maybe adopt some of those things and mix them with what we're doing in Christ. And it can have really an adverse effect on our life. And the idea is there's no compromise with evil. This is their problem. If you don't see it as evil, then the compromise is fairly easy because you don't really see it the way that you should. They didn't recognize what God had already said. And the idea is this is going to be bad for you. Basically, the reason why Israel is such a weak nation and constantly having their enemies rise up against them is because they were full of compromise. And it was the only progress they ever made was when they sort of came to repentance and started to see the way more clearly. And it's really tragic, and it's tragic in our lives today if we don't recognize that we are a separate and distinct people from those in the world. I would like to read 2 Corinthians 6 because I think this is a good application here. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And Brother Timothy, if you wouldn't mind, read that for us, 14 through chapter 7:1. So 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 7:1.
14. Say, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God said, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore go out from their midst, and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean things. Then I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. Since we have this promise, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God.
I mean, that's really kind of sort of telling us, this is really talking about unholy alliances and having partnerships with unbelievers in business and so forth. The idea is we've got to be careful of people having undue influence over us. That's dangerous. And so, the thing about it is, there are religious groups like the Amish, they go off to themselves and they have their own community, or the Hutterites and things like that. That would be something that we would think might be a good thing, but obviously that from other verses, when it talks about evangelizing the world and being a light and a salt to the earth, you can't do that if you're living in a community off here by yourself doing your own thing. And so as tempting as that may be and how desirable it is, as I'm going to stay away from these people, they're still going to have to deal with sin anyway. And then really the gospel, even if it was the true gospel that they had, would really be minimized because they're only really wanting to look to preserve themselves. So we're in this position where we've got to be in the world, but we can't let the world live in us. I mean, it's a very difficult place to be in because what do we have? A lot of the times we go to the various places we go, that's exactly what it is. We're trying to live for Christ, but there are a lot of people that don't care. And it's very easy if we're not really committed to Christ and dedicate Christ for apathy to come in our lives. Like, why should I put forth all this effort? Look at these people. They don't really seem, they don't seem to be suffering for the sin. It doesn't really seem like maybe what they're doing is all that bad. We sort of just get wore down spiritually, and then we can become apathetic to what we should be doing as Christians. So it is definitely a challenge that we face, but we not only do we put ourselves in places where there are ungodly influences in our society, we have secular education that our children go to, that we might be in. of entertainment, all these things, you know, they're influenced by a secular mindset. Why is it the songs a lot of times that they write aren't really saying, hey, wait till marriage before you get involved with whatever. It doesn't say, hey, don't be getting involved with drinking all this alcohol and getting drunk, and say you need to be sober-minded. It doesn't advocate for the morality that we follow. And so, you know, kind of taking this stuff in can help, it can really work against us and in a negative influence in terms of, you know, our walk with God. Jen, did you have something, or you just were okay? All right, so any other thoughts about that before we move on? We can sort of see what it did to them. So Gibeah, just for your information here, is it's a city belonging to Benjamin. And what's the source here I have here? Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary points out that it's the birthplace of Saul, and it became the capital of his kingdom. So when he was the first king, that was really the, you know, that was the capital of all of Israel in Gibeah. And so it says in many passages it is even called Gibeah of Saul, 1 Samuel 11:4, Isaiah 10 and verse 29. So that's where they're going to end up going, is to that place eventually be the capital of the nation. Verse 13, he said to his servant, that's the Levite, come and let us approach one of these places, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah. So Ramah is another city that belongs to the Israelites, the tribe of Benjamin. And perhaps the reason the Levite mentions Ramah after settling on going to Gibeah is just sort of merely, this is another place. In other words, when we go from Jebus, the next closest city is going to be Gibeah, and after that is going to be Ramah, and perhaps that's why he mentions that in verse 14. So they passed along and went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And so the Levite, his concubine, his servants, a pair of donkeys continue their travel from nearby Jebus to Gibeah. And Gibeah is located in the southern part of the territory of Benjamin. Verse 15, they turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. When they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. And so they turned aside there. The idea is for shelter or refuge. This seems to be a safe place versus staying out in the open. If you're staying out in the open, you got wild animals, maybe you got bandits at some time that may try to attack you and rob you. This is really the safety that the city offers. The open square, a New American Standard uses the Hebrew word, according to Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, is a broad open place in the city. It says usually near the gate. And so this is a place apparently where visitors would come in these ancient Israelite cities. You're like, somebody sitting over there like, oh, okay. And so you're going to know that, hey, these people might need hospitality. You may need to take them into your house because they're sitting in a place that's sort of obvious, noting that fact. So Jameson, Faust, and Brown Commentary and Judges says, quote, the towns of Palestine at this remote period could not, it seems, furnish any establishment in the shape of an inn or public lodging house, and hence we conclude that the custom was then not uncommon for travelers who were late in arriving and who had no introduction to a private family to spread their bedding in the streets or wrap themselves up in their cloaks and pass the night in the open air. A little bit about hospitality. The Oxford Companion to the Bible says about hospitality is one of the most highly praised virtues in antiquity. In nomadic societies, hospitality was an unwritten law. Then it says the law of Moses, it was in the law of Moses, required that because the Israelites had been strangers in Egypt, they should show hospitality to strangers. Exodus 23:9, Leviticus, I think it's 9. I just said the verses. I believe it was 9, 33, and 34. Any questions or thoughts about idea of hospitality and all this other stuff.
I just want to have, I think the Levites kind of made a kind of fatal misjudgment when he said he will go to Gibeah instead of stopping by and.
Yeah, we're not gonna go into Jebus,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
gonna keep
because
going, yeah.
My Bible said that, it said the Levites considered Gibeah a safer place to spend the night than Jerusalem because it was a Benjamin city.
Yeah.
He considered the other part because they are mixed with the outsiders, the non-Israelite, that place is not safe. They may be attacked and all the rest. But now he went to Gibeah, nobody gave him a place to stay.
Right.
Then he decided to stay in the open.
Yeah, so here's the sad thing is that they maybe don't feel like they'll get the accommodations, maybe in that city, they're foreigners, you know, who knows? The Levite is reluctant to go there, but he's confident that they can go to this Israelite city and they'll be taken care of. And guess what happens? Nobody's there. Well, eventually an old man will come from the field and he'll step up. But I mean, the idea is again, we're looking at really the dysfunction of this nation. You know, so we started out, what do we start out? The man's wife, you know, was involved with harlotry, you know, and now she doesn't get put to death for crime of adultery. He gets her, now they're going to the city, because they're not practicing hospitality, and it even gets worse, and that's where we're gonna have to end it tonight. But anyway, thank you for the questions and comments. I want to thank those who watched the video. Hopefully it'll be a blessing to you. Our goal is not just to understand the text correctly, but to make the application to our life, because this is not just an old history book that we just sort of say, that's too bad for them, it's too bad they didn't do better, but it's a benefit to us to sort of examine how we live our lives and the choices we make so that we're going to be pleasing God. Thank you, and God bless you.